So today we have on T.S. Wiley.
We do.
Yes, and she first came into my view right when I first started dating you, because you were having these lunchtime experiences with her. And she
sounds dangerous.
Yeah, I know. She had just written the book, Sex, Lies, and Menopause.
Right.
And you guys were chatting about the Wiley protocol.
Yeah, and in this episode, we talk a lot about the rhythmic release of bioidentical hormones. She's really a household name in Santa Barbara because she was here. It's really interesting to see if she is now, and the long-term effects of her theories and her practice and how she changed things. And some of the questions are still out in the open. What about compounding pharmacies? What about HRT generally? I think you'll enjoy this.
Yeah, I found her section on sleep and melatonin and the adrenals fascinating.
Absolutely.
Enjoy the show.
But what do I know? I'm just a vagina doctor.
T.S. Wiley, welcome to the Vagina Doctor podcast. It's great to have you.
I love the title. Thank you very much. I like the title.
Good.
I'm glad you like the title.
I do. It's hilarious.
Right.
Well, you know, you're still making a lot of fuss about the subject of hormones and life, and I mean, best known for your books, Lights Out, Sex, Life, and Menopause. You've had some good titles, and now I understand you're on a third book.
I'm working on one for the daughters of the women who figured this out 22 years ago and wanted to try it, and because they're in their 40s now. Some of them are uncomfortable, some of them aren't. And I think it's just going to be Sex, Lies, and Menopause 20 years on, but I don't know. I don't know. We might come up with a catchier title.
We have a long history. We talked probably 25 years ago, 23, 25 years ago. We are mutual friends in the medical business, and particularly I'm interested in hormone replacement therapy. So if you don't mind, I'd like you to go into and I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but a summary of your of Sex, Lies, and Menopause, because that was really the world-shaking, earth-shaking philosophy. I think.
When you said summary, I was going to say, you know how old I am. That would take a long time. Sex, Lies, and Menopause was a book. It opens at Woodstock because I wanted to reach people who are our age now and get them interested. And a lot of the subtitles in the book are just song titles.
Yeah.
So that was what was familiar. And I explained to them what happened to them. That's what I usually do in a book. In other words, they were raised with a certain attitude about sex, about contraception, about babies. And a lot of them didn't have babies. You know, a lot of them went to work after World War II, when college was given out with the GI Bill, women couldn't wait for those men to go to college, so they went with them. And they went to college. So the whole world changed in the 50s, frankly. And some women made money, some women got excited, some women figured out they didn't want children. And you can't breastfeed babies you didn't have. And it was my contention that breast cancer was from not breastfeeding, not having babies.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to prove that in the book. I published peer review articles trying to prove that. In fact, I've published about 8 on, if you go to ResearchGate and put in my name, things come up. So Sex, Lies, and Menopause was about the epidemic of breast cancer, the confusion among doctors and women. How's this happening? The world changed. Most of everything is anthropology, right? So you got to look at the people and where they're moving and what they're doing. So Sex, Lies, and Menopause, I hope, made that point. And we talked about cancer treatment in one chapter. I think it was a Rolling Stones song, Sympathy for the Devil, about how doctors treat breast cancer and how it's never going to work like that. And what can you do? And in the end, of course, what you can do is be in one of the 3 states that women have to be in: pregnant, nursing, or waiting to get pregnant. So since I had tried a lot of things on myself, I could not recreate pregnancy. I have 5 kids. I tried that. That was weird. And there's nobody to nurse after they say, Mom, the bus is here, or can we have pizza? That kind of thing. So I thought I can put myself back in a state of limbo where I have a period every month and all of those genes switching on and off at tipping points in my body are controlled by hormones, whether it's sun up and sun down, cortisol and melatonin, or sex hormones. And I thought, if I could get that close to right, or get it so people were comfortable and it didn't damage them, well, that'd be something. So I did. That's what I did in that book. I came up with what's called the Wiley protocol, which is you can't take the same hormones every day. You have to have a period if you can. If you can't, you can follow a lunar cycle. But you got to spin with the earth. Got to be part of the planet. And that came from Lights Out, the book I wrote before. But that was in terms of food and sleep. So I think that's what I did in Sex, Lies, and Menopause.
The first time that you and I talked about hormones was actually because I had been diagnosed with prostate cancer. And I was looking at various ways of dealing with this. My dad had died of it. My maternal grandfather had died of prostate cancer. So for me, it was not a matter of if I was going to get it, it was when. So I was cognizant, I was aware, I was doing the PSA tests and so on, and found it very early. And being in a surgical specialty, we tend to think that's the only way to
let's
treat
throw
something.
it away.
Yeah.
Let's throw away the evidence.
Yes.
Then we won't know if we didn't do it right. It doesn't matter.
Just let's get rid of it.
Yeah.
Forget about it. But you brought up the issue of, okay, testosterone supposedly is bad news for prostate cancer.
Yeah, and estrogen will give you breast cancer.
Okay.
Yeah. Wrong.
And yes.
On both counts.
Yeah, on both counts.
Yeah.
But it made perfect sense to me that the people that were getting prostate cancer were people that had been exposed to testosterone for decades and decades and decades. And my one fact that I seem to remember from medical school was 80% of men over 80 will have prostate cancer.
Yeah.
They may not die from it, but on autopsy, that's where they are. So the whole thought of why when men are at their peak of testosterone, we don't see any testosterone. We don't see prostate cancer. So that's how you and I talked. Now, I decided to use both what you were saying and what I was saying to treat it.
Yeah.
To good effect. Testosterone.
Good. Yeah.
And surgery. And so, and it was actually at a time when I knew somebody in the world was doing this laparoscopically.
Yeah.
As I researched it, it only seemed like that wasn't happening in the U.S. The highest number of cases that...
I'm trying to remember when it started here, the laparoscopy.
Well, it was...
Laub went overseas to learn how.
Yeah. And he was actually my urologist.
Yeah.
And that was when the robot came in and facilitated that operation. But there was a guy in Paris doing this.
Yeah.
And I went to Paris to have the surgery. A lot of things that didn't make a lot of sense to me, but I felt that was the right thing for me to do. And it's all worked out. So
well, you're sitting here.
I'm sitting here.
Yeah.
And everything works. So,
I thought, my first thought about Sex, Lies, and Menopause, I probably had a hot flash when my youngest daughter, who's now 31 and just had a baby named Clementine here in town, or actually in Santa Fe where we are, she was 3. So I was probably 42, 43, and I didn't know what happened. I was, melting down from the inside out. I didn't like it. I didn't feel good. I thought it was weird. I realized it was a hot flash, and I thought, well, I don't want to do that again. So I started to look at taking estrogen. Of course, everything said it'll kill you. You can't have estrogen. And I'm kind of a motto player, master of the obvious. That's what I do. That's how I think. And I thought, if estrogen kills women, all young women would be dead.
Right.
All pregnant women would be deader. Okay? Mm-hmm. So I thought, it's not the estrogen. Maybe it's when you take the estrogen. Maybe it's how you take the estrogen. Maybe it's how much you take. So I started to work on the idea that I would get some estrogen. And it was obvious to me that I would mimic a young woman's state of being. And I looked at the rhythms. I looked at the amounts in the bloodstream. I talked to compounding pharmacists. I mean, it was a long haul to get something that's pretty reliable, And I can make women have periods, which means I can get insurance to pay for it. That's gender-affirming care. And they're transitioning back to being young. I'm going to do that. Because we need the insurance companies to play ball.
So at that time, compounding pharmacies, how involved were they in treatments like compounding medication for hormone replacement therapy?
Well,
then?
I'm not going to say they started there because the money's in pain creams, but they were doing it here and there. I talked to a guy named Bill Altmiller in Sacramento. Somebody recommended to me because people would come and Julie would tell them where I was, Taguchi. And then they'd call me, and this woman's husband had cancer. And she had called me, and I said, well, where are you getting hormones now? Because she was thinking, if he's going to die, he should die comfortable. And being without hormones is not comfortable for most people.
Right.
I mean, you get used to it, but that doesn't mean it's comfortable. So this woman called me, and I called him. So the first hormones I got were like Sacramento. And then I, like always, decided to learn about compounding. I ended up owning my own compounding pharmacy in Santa Fe and work with compounders. And I devised the base cream for the Wiley protocol because the base creams are a nightmare. They're full of crap. And I've got 5 ingredients that work. You don't have to have 25. And the hormones, when they're making them, compounding, they have to dissolve the powder. The hormones come in a powdered form from desiccated yams. And they do it with something called propylene glycol. Propylene glycol is antifreeze. Now, if you want to take these hormones for 30 years, you don't want to rub antifreeze in every time. So we use glycerin. And that means the pharmacists have to let it sit overnight, but it works. So I got very involved in how they were made, how they were shipped, methods, materials, pricing, packaging. And then I got a bunch of pharmacies together because I couldn't test anything unless there was standardization. So we did standardization, and I would have the pharmacies grab random applicators of hormones and send them to a third party for testing in St. Louis. And if they weren't good, one of my sons dealt with the third party, and then he'd call the pharmacy and say, you don't want my mom to call. I'm telling you, it's not good. So he'd report back to the pharmacies and try to get them to play ball. And that way, if somebody came in and said, my leg fell off and I think it's your hormones, I would say, tell me what color packages they're in, because they're color-coded.
Yeah.
Tell me who your doctor is, what your dose is. I could work it back to the pharmacy to find out if they got what I intended and why their leg fell off.
Right.
But
Science.
no one's leg fell off.
No one's leg fell
Okay,
off.
good. Just clarifying.
Well, we call that science,
So just for people listening, and we do have patients using the Wiley protocol, by the way, let's go into that dosage, somebody that goes on Wiley.
Well, I made a very basic dose, which was the minimum amount, and it comes in 3 ml syringes with 30 lines, tiny lines. And those tiny lines are in estrogen 1 milligram per tiny line, and progesterone 20 milligrams, and testosterone 10 milligrams. It just depends on the concentration. And I put them in those because it won't sediment. When you put it in something called a toppy click, like a big jar, not only is the dose not accurate, but it sediments down to the bottom.
Yeah.
They started in the beginning putting it in oil. Not mine, but other people. And by the time they got to day 14, they were taking so much hormone they were sick because it was all on the bottom and they were squeezing it up. And so it has to be, the viscosity of the cream has to hold it. And you have to use it a month, and you get some more. And I decided we would dose it because everybody can count tiny lines. And for day 1 to 5, 4 milligrams or 4 lines of estrogen, morning and night, is a basic dose. Then it goes all the way up to 8 lines, morning and night on day 12. It drops, because this is what it looks like in a textbook.
Yeah.
Across, up, drop. It's those tipping points and those bottoming out that turn the genes on and off all over your body for apoptosis, for growth, for anything. So I learned a lot about genetics eventually, but the basic Wiley protocol goes up and down like that. You add in progesterone on day 12, and it goes up to day 21 and down to day 28. And if you need more, nobody ever needs less, because that was the least amount that would build a good uterine lining and let it fall. And you want the endometrium, right, on the muscle wall, to be vascularized during the progesterone phase. So you have to have enough estrogen on day 12 to make progesterone receptors. I learned molecular biology in terms of receptor response, because it really isn't how much you take, it's how much you receive. So if we do that, I thought it would work. I mean, all of those things, and doctors wanted some control, surprise. So I made the back of the package so they could raise the whole curve a line or 2 lines. And then eventually I made something I thought was funny called XXX. And it's 3 times a day, because you can't put more than a certain amount in at a dose, or you're going to shut down the receptors, like insulin resistance. So I put a dose in the middle of the day. And people
where
felt
do
better.
they apply? Where do you recommend
Well,
applying?
in the first place, I believed it was arms. Triceps, bat wings, whatever, arms, estrogen on one arm, progesterone on the other. Then, I don't remember which drug company came out with something called Estrazorb, which was a lotion. And Estrazorb, they put it on arms. I win. And then they did a hugely expensive, creepy punch study where they took out punch graphs in women and saw how it went in. So I was convinced that I was right about arms. And with the other hormones for men, there's a DHEA, and I told them to put it over their kidneys in the back. Adrenals are little hats on your kidney. And testosterone, the femoral artery near testicles, between the crack. Thyroid, women put it right on their thyroid and all the nodules go away. You don't have to take their thyroid out. It's stuff like that, Logic, remember? Master the obvious. Not being a doctor, I was not previously confused and brain damaged by medical school. So I could just ask questions and go find it. And I got lucky. The internet came speeding along.
Yeah.
And it got easier than sitting up at the top of Sansom in the doctor's library trying to look it up.
What, there was a mention in one of the podcasts that we were listening to recently with Bulletproof.
Oh, yeah, 508. People call it just 508.
And that is, what is this about your parietal lobe being a bit different?
That's what
part of the brain.
That's what Dr. Carrazza diagnosed it as.
Oh, okay.
He quit a few months ago. I had herpes in my eye, and it crosses the blood-brain barrier at that point. And I was on a vacation. We were going to New York. I think I was in Southampton, out on the island by East Hampton. And I went to the doctor, and they might have been a CAT scan. It wasn't a PET scan. They said, we see all kinds of spots in your brain. We think you have MS. I said, I don't think I have MS, but I'd had a blasting headache. And I would walk up Murray Hill toward Columbia to get the headache to stop. And then I went into town, and I went to New York Hospital on the Upper East Side. And the guy said, well, first he said, were you a twin? And I said, yeah. Why'd you ask that? And he said, you can see it in the brain where, And I said, that's kind of creepy. And he said, but you don't have MS. You have herpes in your brain. And I said, wow, what do we got for that? And he said, nothing. He said, either herpes wins or you win. I said, really? It's that dire? And he said, yeah, it's pretty bad. I said, okay, thanks. So, because I was visiting my editor, I don't know what I was doing. Because I wrote things before I wrote books. But it took a while. On the way home, with this blasting headache, I stopped at the University of Chicago, where a couple of my kids were. And I went into the medical bookstore. And I bought hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of medical books. And my husband said, what are we doing? I said, they're going to mail them, and you're going to pay for them. It's going to be okay. And they showed up, and apparently he describes it as, I put them in a stack here, and I would read, and I write in the margins and yellow highlight things and dog-ear pages, put it over here. And he said he watched me go through a pile of at least 12 or 13 in a week, read them, put them over here. I was not only trying to figure out what happened to my brain, but I was looking up hormone stuff. I mean, I had some access that wasn't go to a library at that point. And finally, I went to see Carrazza because my son-in-law is an epileptic. And I knew Carrazza from meeting him when Ian joined our family. I took Ian to Dr. Carrazza. And I said, can we give him hormones? And Carrazza said, why?
Wait, who's Dr. Carrazza?
He's a neurologist here in Santa Barbara.
Okay.
He just retired. And he said, why? And I said, well, why not? Have you looked his estrogen or his testosterone's 800? And the kid is 23. This is not right. And he said, oh, I don't care. Tell me what you want. So I wrote it down. And it turned out Ian could take much less anti-seizure medication when we got his hormones up. And anti-seizure medication's hard. Mm-hmm. It'll kill your liver. It'll kill everything. So Carrazza said, as doctors have said, I want to look at your brain. I want to look inside you. I'll make a deal with you. I'll prescribe this if you come in. So I came in and I walked heel toe, and he looked at my balance and he looked inside my head. And he said, you have an extra brain. And I said, is it in my elbow? Where is this extra brain? And he said, you have a lump of tissue that shouldn't be there. And I said, is it a tumor? I mean, what? Is it a neoplasm? What is it? And he said, it's part of the parietal lobe, and I don't know why it's there. It looks fine. And the joke was always that I was taking massive amounts of hormones while reading all of those medical books. And I just grew at peace in my the parietal lobe is where you synthesize information, where everything relates
So you exercise.
to everything. Well, I made one more too.
Yeah.
I think like that anyway. I grew up on a farm in Illinois, and I kind of know how the world works: animals, plants, people. So that's my parietal lobe. Herpes.
A comment. I know that you're opposed to the synthetic oral contraceptives.
Sure.
But there is a significant protection that they give to the ovary in terms of incidence of ovarian cancer.
Yes, but
What do you think about that?
well, I think that ovarian cancer happens in the outside capsule. And I think the bubbles, the ripening eggs, leave little tears and rips when they come out of the follicle.
Yeah.
And I think over time, if you don't have hormones, it's always been my belief that hormones keep your organs, keep your whole body the way it's supposed to be. Because you're at your prime when you have all these hormones. So your liver stays a liver, no cancer. Your lungs stay lungs. Your prostate stays like it's supposed to be. Your breasts. Everything is sculpted by the effect of apoptosis. Progesterone for men, it's DHT. That's your apoptotic factor. And I think the ovary, when you start to run out of hormones and it's got some damage, is possible if it's genetic. It runs in families, ovarian cancer. And if you take a contraceptive, you're not ovulating. The damage is not accruing. Okay? That's very important.
Damage is not accruing.
Yeah,
Okay.
because you're on a contraceptive. Now, I don't think synthetic hormones are particularly good for you, but I think the logical answer to the question is if you're not ovulating, you can't build up scars, damage, whatever. Those contraceptives barely act like hormones. Most of the ones for women act like androgens, frankly. So you can be a guy and your ovary can stay pristine and maybe you won't go to ovarian cancer.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
It's not like I didn't think about it. I thought about that a long time ago because I saw all those articles.
Okay, back to the books. Lights out. Being the best that we can be, essentially. You know, sleeping when we sleep, eat in season.
Well, not being miserable. People wake up exhausted. They can't figure out why they can't get out of bed. Well, when you don't have enough melatonin in the dark hours before midnight, and right now, I don't know, it gets dark about, is it 8? No, it's,
8-ish.
yeah. Okay, so you have to have melatonin for those 4 hours, or it comes back in the morning. And it's like you're drugged. It's like you have a hangover. You can't possibly get up. So I wanted people to understand that if you get up and look at the sun for 10 minutes, if you know, and men salute the sun if they're healthy, all of those things are connected. And the artificial light, having your house look like Yankee Stadium at a night game, you know, every room the lights are on. Right. Totally not necessary. Candlelight, how many lumens is in a candle versus a light bulb, which is like something like 150 candles. Well, you'd catch on fire. That can't be a natural state to be sitting next to lights like this, right? Mm-hmm. So that was what, and seasonality. In Santa Barbara, particularly, no one understands that when I was writing it, because it's nice here, and the seasons change, but barely. Mm-hmm. My daughter, who lives in LA, says they have fire season, fire NATO season, mudslide season. They have seasons in LA, right, but you don't really have that here.
They're different. Yeah.
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 So I wanted people to understand food and seasons, what you should eat.
Wait, I have a question about melatonin. Are you prescribing that, or do you recommend prescribing that as a compound?
Actually, the Wiley protocol has transdermal melatonin.
Okay.
It's in a black bag with black syringes with little stars and moons. I was really bored by that point. And then, well, decorating is my life. I would much rather do that. And then I made Spark, seasonal pulsatile adrenal recalibration, Spark. And these are the only things that are pills. They're little yellow capsules that have a WP on them. And they're filled with 5 milligrams of hydrocortisone acetate, about a cup of coffee, and some chocolate. It's a smoother ride. So I made a schedule how to take those as Earth turns and have your cortisol peaks come back. Because for most people, their adrenals are toast. They don't have any, but you can make these peaks instead. So Spark and Snooze are a dual therapy.
So if you, like, let's say I wanted to do the Spark and Snooze,
Yeah.
we would order that, right?
Yeah.
And then it would, so at what time, like if I like to go, well, I want to start going to bed earlier. So what time would you put the melatonin on? And where would you put it?
You put the melatonin, well, I usually put it on my neck, but you put the melatonin on if you're going to go to bed within an hour.
Okay.
Because you could be driving a car. I don't know how susceptible you are. You might fall asleep. You know, you can't walk around and really do stuff. You put the melatonin on, and it's got to be dark. You can't be looking at your phone.
It would be dark.
You can't be watching TV. So if it's dark and you put on the melatonin, you'll be asleep in about 15 minutes.
And then the other adrenal
Spark. Dawn, dusk, and 2 times in between. But it depends on how long the day is.
Yeah.
How many hours in between. It's on the back. It's always on the back of the package.
Okay.
I just write it down. Okay. And if you can follow the schedule on the back of the package, that's the deal. It has to be standardized. You don't, when you go get Valium, you could get a 5 or a 10. To be pharmaceutical, to be testable, to be usable, it has to be standardized in the manufacture and in the dosing. Now, the old deal, we're all different. We're all special women, kind of, that we're certainly ethnically different. And that's why you can bring it up. You can, you can't really bring it down. You can spread out the dose. It's a miracle when somebody gets a migraine. Usually the receptors are vibrating. And if you spread out the dose, like 4 milligrams morning and night, that's 8 milligrams. You just spread them out 2 for about 3 days, and the receptors catch up. They can dance. And fluctuating receptors, migraines, tinnitus, incontinence, there's a million things that are fluctuating receptors.
It's fascinating.
Was that too medical?
No, it's not medical. It's just...
See, I think if I swear in there somewhere, it becomes
Less
perfectly understanding.
Yeah.
Understandable.
I mean, sleep is just a common complaint we hear every single day from patients.
Well, they don't get up. That's one of the things people have to understand. You can't go to sleep if you don't get up. You really have to get up with the sun.
Yeah.
And stay up. And have a real life and a real day. Eat something, take a walk. Even if you're not going to work for 3 hours later or never, you still have to roll with the planet.
Right.
And then you can sleep. So a lot of not sleeping is no hormone. Estrogen. You give women estrogen and they say, oh, I can sleep. Well, what happens is if you give them melatonin in the hours before midnight and they've taken their estrogen, in the middle of the night, the melatonin blocks estrogen and they sleep better, and then it rebounds. The estrogen comes back up. So women who wake up at 3 and 5, at 1 and 3, have a better solid sleep taking melatonin and estrogen.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly where I saw this quote from you, but
Oh, God, no.
I think you called. I think you likened men to parasites.
I have said things like, did you ever come to one of my seminars in the planetarium?
No.
Oh. I taught doctors in a planetarium in Glendale. I may do it again. And it was a 2-day thing so they could have CMEs, and I would like them to learn this. Taguchi talked about our cancer stats. Courtney Ridley talked about the clinical stuff. And I waved my arms and, we had a soundtrack. And I explained to them how it works. And I did say in one of those that men want women, women want babies, and babies want fathers. But women don't really want men in any way. And the parasitic nature, well, hide the salami is always fun, but the parasitic nature of having to take care of a big baby, they want to, they look at you for, what are we doing? Did anybody see the Barbie movie yet?
We haven't seen it, but I want to see it.
Oh, that's in the Barbie movie. I didn't just say it, okay? People have gotten hip to the idea that once women had those contraceptives and they could plan their lives, and they went to college before that, they have their own plans. Yeah. So in order to get those babies they want, they don't have to take care of a big baby necessarily.
Right. I just thought it was a somewhat interesting description.
Well, I have 2 sons and 3 daughters and 3 grandsons. So there's a lot of men at my house.
A quick bit of advice for menopausal women?
Oh, I thought you were going to give me some.
No, I'm
you
asking
said a quick
for
bit
it.
of advice. I was going, okay, Duncan, what do you want me to know?
I know better than to do that.
Don't say parasite. I thought that's where you're starting.
Don't say parasite.
Yeah.
Right. Physicians caring for menopausal women with the increased demands that they have on their lives, their activity, their choices. Is hormone replacement therapy, systemic hormone replacement therapy for a lifetime?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I always tell women, they say, well, how can I get off this?
Right.
And I said, well, you can quit any time. You'll just get old again.
Yeah.
It's not that hard.
I
and
agree.
yeah, I mean, that's just how it works. It's like being a diabetic. If your pancreas is crashed and burned, you're going to take insulin. And you don't just stop one day. I mean, you can get a transplant, or you can get... I worked with a scientist here in town. He's slipped this mortal coil. And when I found him, he was kind of interested in hormones. And he and a partner were trying to put fetal ovaries purchased from clinics under the forearms of women, thinking they'd kick in and take over like a transplant.
Right.
And I said, I don't think that's going to work.
No.
So it didn't work.
Right.
But I've worked with a lot of doctors and scientists. A woman named Joanne Manson at Harvard, I met when I testified before the Senate about compounding. And Joanne wrote a paper about vitamin D. And I read it. I hadn't talked to Joanne in 13 years. And it was a stupid paper. It didn't make any sense. She didn't even age and gender match. I mean, it was just all over the place. Sloppy work. And I said, I didn't know where she was, but I found a phone number on the internet for her office at Brigham and Women's Hospital, because she was part of the Women's Health Initiative. And I left a message at 8 o'clock at night, which was 10 o'clock in New York. And she called the next morning immediately, because I said, I think your paper sucks, and I want to tell you about it. Do you remember me? And she said, of course I remember you. What's wrong with it? And I told her all the things. And I said, first of all, you were disappointed. You had 16,000 people or something. It was a drug company study. You know how they made a drug company, Vitamin E? And of course, it didn't do anything, and it made people have heart attacks. But they were trying to do it with vitamin D. And I think Joanne was the patsy who was supposed to give it to people. And she said, well, it just didn't work on anything. She's a cardiologist, and she was sure she would see heart benefit, and she didn't. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, when people take vitamin D, it's very twitchy because you're supposed to be out in the sun to begin with to get vitamin D. It is in some foods. And I said, do you understand what the receptor is, Joanne? And she said, well, it's D3. And I said, no, that's the hormone. Do you understand the receptors for vitamin D? And she said, no. And I said, so if you give it to them and they can't receive it, it's not going to do anything, right? She said, yeah. And I said, melatonin makes the receptor for vitamin D. So if you don't sleep, there's no melatonin, so you can't take in the sunshine the next day. Mm-hmm. So, well, that's very interesting. I thought so. Yeah. So we started to work on a paper and the pandemic hit.
Brief thought about compounding pharmacies. They're under the gun again.
Always.
We've worked, actually, I was introduced to Harper Compounding through you and Julie, and they've been stellar.
Oh, good.
Really been great. They're actually coming on the podcast in a few weeks.
Mike Shaw or Mike Wah?
No, it's actually
it's
Mai.
To Mai and Toma.
Yeah, Mai and Toma.
Okay. Mai like Mayank, or it's a woman?
It's a woman. Yeah.
Okay.
Both women.
I don't know those guys.
Okay.
It's who we work with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've been working on a platform, the Wiley protocol as I envisioned it, and what can be studied, and honestly, knowing what's in it. In other words, do they get the raw materials from the vendors that they've signed a contract to do it? All the cream from one place, all the powder from one place, because you can't truly standardize the medicine if they're just buying what's cheap that day, right?
Right.
So it's important that when women want the Wiley protocol, they go to a registered pharmacy, and that's on our website.
Right.
And those people have agreed, even if it costs them a little more, they're going to do the right thing. So,
and
that also protected the pharmacies. The last raid on compounding pharmacies, it was called bud testing, beyond use date. Mm-hmm. And they decided that they would go to these little pharmacies and tell them that they have to have beyond use date for all the hormones they were making. And of course, nobody had that. Mm-hmm. And it would cost $150,000 or whatever. But I wrote a letter and argued and explained that the Wiley protocol pharmacies all used the same thing. So they only needed one beyond use date per hormone from one pharmacy because it was all the same.
Yeah.
And they bought it.
Good.
The government. So it benefits the pharmacies too.
T.S. Wiley, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
For being on the Vagina Doctor podcast.
Well, it went
really fun.
It went quickly, and it was nothing like a pelvic exam.
Great to see you. Thanks.
You too, Duncan.
Well, thanks for listening. We're getting really good feedback. We'd really appreciate a review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. Thank you. You can always DM the Vagina Doctor Instagram with any questions or topics you'd like to learn more about, or email us. The Vagina Doctor Podcast. It all starts here.